We are in the depot of Museum Vrolik, the storage where most of our collection is housed. And we are here to introduce to you this mystery object. And for you to have a better look at it, I'll take the glass dome away so you can see. In order to understand what this mystery object is all about, we need to dive into the funerary history of Amsterdam. When in Amsterdam the population grew in the second half of the 19th century, also new cemeteries had to be created. And they were located in the outskirts of Amsterdam, so in the borders of the city. One on the eastern part of Amsterdam, the Oosterbegraafplaats, and the other on the western side of Amsterdam, the Westerbegraafplaats. And these cemeteries lasted from around 1866 up to 1894, and then they were closed because the city had to expand again, and on the areas where the cemeteries were located, new buildings were created. So at the eastern part, at the Oosterbegraafplaats, the area was cleared because of the creation of a park, het Oosterpark, but also because of two important buildings. One was the Colonial Institute, later to become the Tropenmuseum, and the other was the anatomical laboratory from anatomist Lodewijk Bolk. And Bolk is relevant in this respect because he was also an anatomist who added a lot of new preparations and specimens to the collection of Museum Vrolik. And Bolk was very much interested in very different anatomical topics. He was interested in anthropology, he focused on comparative anatomy, but also on the anatomy of the brain. So he was really a busy man in anatomy in that early 20th century. So that building was built starting from roughly 1904, 1905, and it was finished in 1909. And here we see a picture of that building just when it just was finished. And if you look at it, you see, for instance, here the lecture room that he created, and here this part of the building was where the anatomical museum, the Museum Vrolik, would to be located. But if you look at the garden, more in the foreground here, you see that there are still graves located in the garden. Probably would be cleared later on, but they were still there at that time that the building was used already. So that clearing of those Amsterdam cemeteries in the early 20th century gave an excellent opportunity for the anatomist Bolk. He got permission from the city council to bring all those skeletal remains, all those hundreds of thousands of bones, to his newly built laboratory and study them. Bolk was interested in human anatomy, in human variety within anatomy, so he really could focus on all these different anatomical variations that could exist in our skeletal system, in our bones, but especially, I would say, within the makeup of the skull. For instance, in cases that we see here, that we call craniosynostosis, which means an early closure of certain sutures in the skull, resulting in a kind of abnormally shaped skull. Or in cases like what you see here, where there are extra sutures creating extra cranial bones. So Bolk was interested in tiny differences in the anatomy, in the makeup of the body between individuals. So in cases like this, for instance, where you have the lower part of the vertebrae, the sacrum, where you sometimes see an extra vertebrae, or in other cases an absent vertebrae, and he would keep all of those and add them to his collection. Bolk was also interested in dental anomalies, all kinds of differences in the arrangement of our teeth, but also, for instance, in maxillary anomalies, like these that you can see here, cases of a non-closure of the palate, resulting in cleft palate, for instance. Mild cases, so people could survive and could live with these, probably without much problems. And in this case, you see examples of all kinds of dental anomalies. These cases are quite interesting because they show a complete disarrangement, I would say, of all the teeth. Nowadays, someone with such an arrangement would go to the orthodontist, but of course in those days they didn't have that. And so we're back at the mystery object. During the clearing of the Westerbegraafplaats, so on the west side of Amsterdam, this was found in 1923. And Borg wrote in his catalogue, actually in the year 1928, he wrote down what it consists of. He says it's the cast of the cranial cavity, so the inside of a skull of a child, created by the roots of a tree or possibly ivy. And he also describes that the details of the inside of the skull are really very complete and very clearly visible. We actually can really see all the parts where the sutures would be located. If we turn around the object, you can even see the parts of the cranial cavity that are really close to the eye sockets here, and over here you also see the part of the cranial cavity where the brain continues into the spinal cord. So it really is a very nice natural cast of the inside of the skull. So why did Borg find this natural cast so interesting? Well, Borg was really interested in development of humans, not only evolutionary development but also fetal development, so how an individual human would develop from the fetus onward to the adult. And for that purpose he not only studied skulls of adults and of children, but also the inside of those skulls. So he would create casts of the inside of the skull of children, in this case a children's skull, and adults, and he would compare the two with each other, but he also would compare them with the casts he made from the skulls, for instance from a gorilla, and he put those casts in some kind of evolutionary context. But I also believe Borg found this natural cast interesting for another reason. Maybe just for the reason of curiosity. Because it's so rare that a root would grow inside the cranial cavity of a skull and create such a beautiful cast. And in that aspect maybe Borg stood in a tradition that went back all the way to the 16th century or 17th century, and that is the Cabinet of Curiosities, where people would keep all kinds of interesting things from throughout the world. They would keep that in their cabinets and see it as special and important things. For instance, bezoar stones, or in Borg's case also tattoos, because he also kept beautiful tattoos that he found in the anatomical laboratory in the bodies that were dissected. Talking about those tattoos, that will be the topic of our next anatomy stories. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, please write them down below. And of course, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We hope to see you next time.